I'm Dawn Montefusco, and this is Write Because It Matters. And today we have Marisa Goudy. She's a writer, storyteller, and writing coach who specializes in working with therapists, coaches, healers, and emerging thought leaders. Hi, Marisa.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I absolutely love your website, by the way.
Thank you.
It gives me so much I don't know how, but it motivates me to love online writing, to love messages, to love storytelling and business. There's just a great energy behind it that I do actually want to say thank you for, because just in that I get a lot out of it. But you, tell us about what led you to start your company and become a writing coach.
Well, it was a little bit of a circuitous journey. It took me a while to really claim the title and recognize, when you were born a writer and have always known you wanted to be a writer, and you get to create your own business, it would be a really great idea to do it as a writer. But I don't necessarily take the easy approach, or so it seems, and I learned by doing. And I've been in business for myself for getting on 6 years, but I ended up entering the space in more the promotions and marketing side of things. I didn't quite trust writing as a way to earn a living. I was really thinking I had to help people succeed on Facebook and make their local events work, because that seemed more practical. And I did a lot of writing for my clients, but I'd never really stepped up and said, this is what I do, and because this is my gift, this is something that matters. And so I ended up kind of evolving from doing promotions work to working with a partner on a website design business, and did a lot of, content and copywriting in that guise, but again, didn't allow the writing to stand on its own. But it was one of those, that little voice inside me I just couldn't ignore sort of situations just kept emerging. And it's been getting on, I guess close to a couple years now that I finally just claimed, writing coach, that's what I do.
Yes.
And writer, that's who I am. Storyteller, that's what we're all born as.
Yes.
Okay, let's pull all this together. And all of a sudden, trying to run a business became more like actually having and running a business.
Tell us more about that. What was the shift from the trying to the doing?
There was a moment that I'll always remember. I live in New York's Hudson Valley, and it's just, rivers and mountains and gorgeous. And we have this summer camp called Wild Earth, known across the whole country. It's a model. And actually, my daughter's there today at a year-long program. Well, I didn't send her there for a year, but she goes every Saturday. Sometimes it would be nice to get more writing done if I sent my children away. But that would also take away from, they're my muses in many ways, so take from the stories. But at any rate, I was dropping my 5-year-old off at this camp, and I just knew she was going to have the time of her life. And I knew how much I had worked to pay her tuition to go. This was not an inexpensive situation. And I just felt the level of that disconnect about how hard I was working doing something that I didn't love to send her somewhere that she loved. And that was that moment. And I began the breakup with my business partner, which was long and emotional and had a lot of tears. And, she and our businesses are still best friends. We help each other all the time. But it enables her to develop websites and enables me to be a writing coach and really step into the storytelling. And that whole concept of doing what I love, it's a cliche until you're actually willing to step up and do it.
Yes. You even mentioned that there was an aha moment with the cubicle or something on your website. You said, oh, no, you do that for people. You help people who are sick of being in situations that they don't want to be in with work.
That's it's funny. That's the about page that's on my website currently. And I've grown away from that. And I actually, and it's one of those on the lists of, of course, as the writer who helped people write their about pages, is mine the one that's like, oh boy, that's an old story. But yeah, that was really I worked in academia for years, and my mother died. And that was that moment of that real first break into stepping into entrepreneurship. And then, of course, it's a much longer journey, I suppose, of 4 years more to realize, now I need the right kind of entrepreneurship. Not just to tell a story, tell the right story.
I love it. I'm actually glad you didn't update the about page, because I loved what you just said. That it was a journey, that the journey takes steps. And one of the things is sometimes, I even think this happens as writing, we don't know the bigger story yet. We have to kind of, people want to know how their book is going to end before they write it, whether it's nonfiction, memoir, or fiction. And the truth is, you have to get on the path. You have to start writing to see how it unfolds. I mean, yes, we have outlines and we have ideas and things like that, but life is like that. That's the story of life, is the hero's journey. So I love that it took you 2 bumps, one out of this bump and the next one, wait a second, what do I really love to do?
Right.
And as a writing coach, I think it's amazing that you help people with what I think can be one of the most terrifying things to do, which is it's a lonely sport, right? You've got to, which is why a writing coach is very helpful. So can you tell us a little more about when you work with your clients, why the stories matter, why their stories matter in their business, and what is it about being a writing coach that's so gratifying to help people get unstuck?
There's a lot of different questions in there. They're all so juicy, but in terms of why I see writing coaching working so well for business owners, it's just that sense that, businesses are about people, connections, relationships. At least the businesses that I'm working with people on, they're, very heart-centered, service-based. You're bringing your passions to the plate pretty much every time you're working with a client. And, stories work exactly the same way. It's about people, it's about relationships, and it's about connections. And as human beings, we need story. There's that, it's a cliche, but it's totally true in that sense of how we're all wired for story. And that works when we're sitting down with a novel that engrosses us, with the next greatest TV show we can't wait to watch, and with a blog post that makes us read all the way to the end. Ultimately, it always comes back to, well, did that story engage me? Did it make me want to take the next step, whether it's turn the next page or click the next button or pick up the phone? And when I started seeing the way that business and story fit so well together, it meant a ton to me personally, because I'm a fiction writer. I'm a student of fiction and poetry, trying to do business on this side and the creative fictiony stuff on that side. It ended up just breaking my heart over and over again. And so I think there's in not all of my clients would necessarily call themselves creatives, at least not creative writers. But I think that essence of that element of getting down and telling your story and seeing that as something you can make and create rather than churn out, because we think of churning out online content and feeding the online content beast. Those are not beautiful creative concepts. That isn't about writing that matters. That's about Google and SEO and stuff that's just not satisfying in the core. And so instead, when you can take it and look at it as, what I'm creating here is, it's going to be digital and it may be fleeting, but I'm growing in this process. I'm learning about myself, about the work that I do, about the theories I'm trying to put forth, about my vision that, hey, I want this collection of blog posts to eventually become a book,
right? To
become something that seems more enduring than, www. whatever.
That's awesome. What, so with story, how about what's one of your most cherished stories on helping someone have a breakthrough in their writing?
I'm a believer in magic, and I'm a believer in alchemy. And we know that, storytelling is alchemy in and of itself. You take these raw ideas and musings and you turn them into something with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and something that really affects people. And there's a process I have that, that makes it sound as if it's more well thought out than it is. Instead, it's like magic in the sense that sometime around minute 46 in a call, you're like, I don't know where this is going, I don't know where this piece is going. I'm not sure how, am I wasting this person's time? Oh my God, like, what if we come up with nothing? We never come up with nothing. There's always that moment of alchemy, of that moment when it all just came together. We know that we're sitting down and talking about this specific article you're writing, this specific page on your website, and spending this much time and care on it because something bigger is going to happen here. I mean, for example, as a writing coach, I don't only work with people putting out written content. I was working with a woman who's putting together a TED Talk.
Oh, nice.
And she had a whole formula put together. And as we started going through, I had an opportunity to just ask her questions about some basic statements. She's making it takes a village, ... statement. And when we had the chance to really dive into that and say, well, what does that really mean to you? That's actually, it's a cliche. If we unpack this cliche and make it into something else, all of a sudden, all these connections started happening.
Wow.
And that occurred because she had done the writing, we were doing the talking, and now she's going to go back and write. There's that middle place where, writing is about more than on the page. It's also about conversation and connecting.
You said something great. So what I always would tell myself, at least, and now I'm learning more every day, always learning, that the private world, so we have the cliche, but then you went into the private world probably of her story, actually somehow when you get in there connects to the universal world. And I'm sure, I have my theories about it, but it sounds like you really, you get there, you understand that. Can you tell us about maybe your guess as to why that is? Why is it that when we get real private, somehow we burst into this universe?
I think there's this relationship between the small s stories and the capital S story, and that we're always sort of intertwining the two. In the sense that you need to know your small s stories and kind of go into, and then this happened, and then this happened, and I did this because of that. Very personal, may or may not be all that interesting to somebody else on the outside because you're doing this, it's in your journal. It's the thing you have to scribble through, right? But only when you kind of walk through that can you get to that bigger S story that says, oh my God, there's something universal in this experience. In, my losing my mother and quitting the job that I hated, there's something so much bigger in the story of grief and transition and why, it's the cliche of one door closing and another door opening. Yeah. And, again, it challenges us to take cliche, to take something that seems like a truism and a universal, anchor it in real life, and then, again, perform that alchemy to turn it into a lesson that, and not even, a lesson makes it sound almost like it's too didactic, but just some sort of message that reaches people in a core way that, our pat phrases don't do, but our lived stories really can. Yes.
Well, and what about breakthroughs for you? I know you have a great story about your breakthrough in writing, I'm sure. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I was speaking a little earlier about that kind of concept of like, oh yeah, and then I remembered I was born a writer.
Yeah.
I think a lot of life is a constant process of forgetting and remembering. Yes. Like, you talk about the hero's journey. I think that's what happens along the way. Because if we remembered everything we'd known, we would just zip right through.
Yeah.
So for me, the breakthrough kind of happened around on January 1st of this year when I had a house full of people and we had kids everywhere. And I said, guys, you're welcome to stay. I need to go over there into my office and I need to start writing. I had this idea of doing a story a day in 2016, and 365 strong stories told me it had to come through.
Wow.
And so we just happened to be the day we're recording this is the 100th day of the year.
Oh, nice. Wow.
Yeah. So that means I've written 99 stories so far, or / curated. I have guest storytellers who at least give me some relief one day a week.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
That's good.
To expand and bring people in. But that act of every day sitting down and crafting something that, I aim for about 300 words.
Nice.
And
Perfect.
my biggest thing that I force myself to do is make sure there's some sort of transformation described.
Excellent. Yes.
Story is something that's very plastic in terms of how we can define it. It isn't necessarily beginning, middle, and end in a classic way, but it's more than just a vignette. So, in allowing myself to have the creative space to do that every single day, it's really been a breakthrough for me. Because there's something to that whole concept. If you want to be a writer, then you have to write.
Yes.
Admittedly, there's a flip side to that. I have learned in my great wisdom I've gathered in 99 days is that writing every single day and planning on publishing it, if you have a life, if you have a business to run, is absolute madness.
Yes.
So I'm in the process of opening up the project to make it less burdensome on
Yes.
me, because I'm not doing all the writing that matters because I'm fitting myself into this little deadline. So it's taught me a lot about just balancing the writing and the not writing, the short projects and the long, and listening for the guidance when it comes in on, the best conceived projects, the neatest ideas are also open to revision.
Excellent. Yes. Agreed. Tell us about the power, though, that's happening. I think it's amazing that you're publishing it every day. I can see writing a story a day, but publishing it online, every day, that's where I almost think, wow, how are you dealing? Let's ask this question first. How are you dealing with the critic? Because the critic must be very loud, knowing it's going to be seen, versus the 300 words that you can edit later.
My critic is so damn tired. She usually doesn't actually have time to speak up.
I love that.
Because she's like, well, you exhausted me after January 15th, sister. Go forth and don't say anything stupid.
That's an awesome answer, actually.
Yeah, the post I wrote yesterday felt like when I go longer and I go deeper, that's when the critic comes out. You can only be so hard on yourself in 300 words because you can only expect so much. It's like, hey, I'm giving somebody a bang for their buck here. I'm only asking for a 300-word investment.
Yes.
You go on to 800, and this is like a real blog post. That's when I start to go back and edit and get more concerned. So there's a gift in making something short and bite-sized.
Agreed.
Because you didn't promise the moon. You promised them a couple of minutes of I never thought about that way before.
Right, exactly.
Okay, well,
no, I love that. I love that you've exhausted the critic. Because I think that, to some degree, you say, okay, critic, fine. Come on, you can try again. Nope, not listening this time. Until finally it's like, oh my gosh, I've been chasing you for weeks. You won't let me catch up. Until you edit, and then you can worry about that. You can have help with that. But that first draft, so, I've done I started studying how long it takes to write a book. Right? And I've been amazed that in essence, a book really shouldn't take more than 90 days, 3 months to 6 months for the first edit.
Right.
For the first draft, and then you can edit later. But people, Clockwork Orange, 3 weeks, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, 10 days, and there's more, to be said. What's your thought on that in terms of working with people on finishing longer pieces? I think it's probably wise. I've seen it be wiser to just get a bunch out, and then you've got that practice. You've got that practice of writing versus thinking. I say there's no such thing as writer's block. There's thinker's block. So on that note, how do you feel about writing a longer piece in a shorter amount of time? And then editing it, or, how long do you think it should take to write a book?
So much of my experience is with clients in terms of, I look at it from my own experience of we're working on a chapter together. We're working on some sort of piece, and they're telling, we get off our call, I'll have this back to you in a week. And it drags on.
Yes.
It drags on. And it drags on. And it's like, okay, I've completely forgotten absolutely everything we talked about. I'm not going to go back and listen to the recording because that's not my job to do.
Right.
But you just have to understand your investment in me has been diminished because we've all forgotten what you're doing now. If you had gone ahead and it had been fresh and we kept moving with it, just from a practical standpoint of how the human attention works, I think getting it on, and especially when you're collaborating with somebody else and knowing you've got to share a brain with them, you've really got to be aware of the fact that, they've been distracted by 497,000 other shiny objects and they've read 1 million words since the last time they sat down with your stuff. How can you sit down and create this into a daily practice that says, all right, I could churn out 300 words in less than an hour. Way less than an hour. You can churn out 300 words in 10 minutes. They might actually be readable.
Yeah.
And again, from my experience looking at it, I've become much stronger and tighter over the period of doing this. I don't even leave out words in the same way I did before because I've disciplined myself to know I get an hour a day to make this happen, all the way up to image creation and posting. if I only have an hour, I better get it pretty darn close to right the first time and be fully present with it in that moment. And that means fewer sloppy mistakes, which I think are so much of where we can bring our, you'll read a paragraph, a sentence, and it doesn't make any sense. Your inner editor gets to have a field day because it's like, hey, you idiot, you forgot the word not right there. And now you've totally messed up the entire paragraph and the entire page and the entire chapter. No one knows what you're talking about. Whoa. Okay. Well, then I'm going to be more deliberate in my process, think this through and say, I don't have forever to complete this.
Yes.
I can do 300 words in a half an hour, and they can be decent enough to move on and say they're correct.
It sounds like it's I mean, what I'm hearing is great. It's because I often say writing is not a team sport. It's an endurance sport for yourself. But in essence, you're showing up and the practice over and over and over and over and over again. Eventually, it just flows. I mean, it will get better. Elizabeth Gilbert spoke in an interview, and she says it's kind of silly that we think we have to show up and do something and be great at it right away. That's just not the nature of learning and becoming good at something. You don't just show up out of nowhere and you're you're not an expert tennis player. I don't know how to play tennis. If I jumped on a court right now, it'd be bad news. But if I jumped on a court every day for a half hour, in a few months, it would look pretty good. I might not hit myself in the face with the but writing is like that. And I love that you're practicing that as an example of saying, hey, you show up, it will get better, and it will get, so yeah, I think it's different for everybody, but I do think the one thing that holds true is discipline.
And I don't necessarily think it's just to perfect your writing and the actual crafting of sentences. I think it's also that you start to with practice, you do a better job of telling your stories.
Nice.
You understand, especially whether you're working on a memoir, you understand which symbol means something to you. You understand, well, this childhood experience, I've looked at it from 7 different angles. Yeah. I know the small s stories to turn into the capital S story that I'm going to use to tell the bigger story here.
That's amazing.
It's like developing a level of intimacy with your own inner world is what writing is at that level,
Totally. Did you want to talk a little bit about the story triangle? You had mentioned that before we got online, and I wanted to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that, I've mentioned relationships a couple of times in our interview today, and it's so much of writing itself is a relationship. It's you and your words. Of course, that's kind of the most fundamental space. That's when, what's that King Solver quote about being able to close your door and essentially write as if no one's watching?
Oh, right. Yeah.
Which is beautiful and brilliant. And yet, especially those of us who are writing in the digital space, well, guess what? The whole reason you're doing it is to get someone to watch you, And if you write as if no one's watching, no one will watch.
Yes, true that.
It's about a relationship. It's funny, I happen to be holding a triangular shaped stone.
Oh, wow. Is that a jade?
It's actually green quartz.
Oh, nice. Yes.
And I can use it to my example here. The story triangle is the story, the storyteller, and the audience.
Oh, wow.
And
nice.
A constant set of overlapping, interrelated relationships, for lack of wordsmithing there. And it's really about keeping those in balance. If you tell a story that's too much you focused, it's either TMI and just all the gory details, or it's musings that don't have a point. If it's all story, it's, the way a little kid tells you their dreams.
Yes.
And then everybody from Frozen came, and then everybody from How to Train Your Dragon, and it's like, oh my God, this is certainly not about your inner dream state, because this is crazy, and you don't care if I'm listening. So thank you. Go take your story over there and go find your father. Yeah. And then there's the story that's all about the audience. And it's like, I know what you're thinking. Right. Hey, I've got a deal for you. Let me tell you. And
my gosh.
That cheesy, nasty, scary ad copy stuff that every good writer runs away from, every, conscientious business person finds to just be absolutely abhorrent. And so that's the imbalances. When you overemphasize any one of them, your story just doesn't work anymore. Yeah. And so a lot of my work is helping people sort of stand in the middle of that you're always going to be the storyteller. So it's kind of a unique thing to stand in the middle and say, I see myself telling the story. I see what the story is, where it needs to go, what it basically needs to say. I see the audience. I see the person that I'm speaking to. And my goal is to take my thoughts and this narrative and connect it with you.
That's just genius. You did such a great job explaining that right now I'm a little bit like high on how awesome that felt to hear. It's a great, that was just beautiful. So I'm going to stutter as the interviewer for a second because I love teaching. I was a teacher for 10 years and I thought that was a beautiful way to teach. So yes, Thank you. I'm so excited about your webinars and everything that you offer. Is there any last advice before we go on to your free gift? Anything you want to tell people about writing, publishing, anything for last words here?
I always go to the Seamus Heaney quote, if you have the words, there's always a chance you'll find a way.
Oh, that's great.
And ultimately, that's the only inspirational quote that I ever come back to. I mean, he's a Nobel Prize-winning Irish poet, but it happens to be the best advice I've ever gotten when it comes to content marketing to my business, is that, and I kind of, bring it back to, if you have the story, there's always the chance you'll find the way. And to me that, I know writing matters is what you're coming back to that. And that seems to kind of always bring it home, that you may get lost in all the doing and all the trying and the pushing and the posting. Go back to the words, go back to the story, and balance yourself with what you need to write about, what you need to express, and what you need to have heard out in the world.
Oh, that's great.
And trust the stories.
Oh, that's awesome. And tell us about, so you've got a free gift, and then you were going to explain something else that you were inspired for by the summit.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about, my work has taken up so much of this shape around this story triangle, and I've done a lot of talking about it, but I haven't necessarily put it in a form that is easy for everyone to digest without investing an hour in a webinar. So I have something in the works that is going to be really created out of this webinar. Out of this interview series. I'm really excited to be offering that up.
That'll be great. Now, I will definitely have that linked on this page along with your website. And you already have a free gift on your website of an ebook, correct?
Yes, I do.
Tell us a little about that, because I'll put that link there as well.
So that's 3 steps to telling a story that connects. And it, for me, I do everything in threes. It's the Celt in me, it's just part of how things work. And that is kind of walking you through another way to look at this 3. I think there's a lot of different facets that we can, at some point I'd love to lay 4 different 3s together and make some sort of 12 mandala. I'm very visual in that way, in certain ways. And so that's really a great window into my work and how I conceive of storytelling as a way to connect with people. And it's geared at the person who's thinking about blogging and content marketing, but by no means is it a blogging guide, because we don't need any more ways to write 7 steps to nirvana or 7 steps to cleaning up after your dog. We've been there and done that. Let's figure out a way to tell stories that really connect with other people.
That's awesome.
That's where the heart is. That's where the minds are.
Yeah. Marisa, I can't thank you enough. This was so much fun and so informative and so great. So thank you so much for your information and for your offer. And people can find you at your website, which is on here, and that's marisagoudy.com.
Right, yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and so everybody get online, go find Marisa, and I can't wait to talk more and to learn more about what you're doing.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Marisa. Bye.
Bye.